Yo La Tengo released their first single. It's called The River of Water, followed by their first release called Ride the Tiger, which was hailed by the likes of Spin magazine as the type of rock and roll that gets you all fired up to proofread some copy. Welcome to 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and guys who show their love through gentle taunting tell the backstory on the most influential albums of all time, as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Now, if you don't know today's album super well or not at all, no worries. We're going to guide you through it. We're going to play song clips while we dive into the backstory of this artist and this album. And along the way, we'll be breaking these songs down musically and culturally to offer you both our praise and our nitpicky complaints as musicians. And at the end of all that, dear audience, we're going to vote on whether this album is really a must-listen before you die. Now, if you're a regular listener, thank you and welcome back. But if you're new to the show, let me give you our standard disclaimer. We're musicians, you see. We do understand how difficult it is to make truly great art, and we come from a place of love and respect for the craft, but we also enjoy nitpicking and complaining, as the title of our show suggests. So, we are not super fans, but honestly, even if we were, and in this case, I might be on the verge of that, we'd still be laughing about the way our favorite music got made. So the bottom line is we won't be treating this artist or this album with any particular reverence. Instead, we're going to be talking some loving smack, the way all musicians do in the van ride to the next gig when the radio plays literally any song ever. Now, my name is Rob. I'm a guitar player with decades of experience playing, writing, and recording music, and I'm here tonight to walk you through the story of perhaps the epitome of this thing called indie rock, at least as our generation understands the term. Ugh. Boutique fuzz purveyors and nerd royalty, Yo La Tengo, and their 8th full-length album from 1997. It is called I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One. Now, to get us situated, let's play a clip of the first single from this album, and not coincidentally, the first song I ever heard by this band. It is called Autumn Sweater.
No idea that was a single, or that it was like the first single
ever played anywhere. Oh, all right. Sorry.
Might be a contentious episode. Before we get in and introduce our complainers, I should say I gave you our normal spiel about pulling records randomly every week from the 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die book. But this week is a special week where we, as your complainer co-hosts, have chosen some glaring omissions from the 1001 list, personal favorites. We then kicked it out to you, our audience, over on our very free Patreon page to vote on which album we should cover. And I am in the driver's seat first, ladies and gentlemen, and I have picked, and you have helped me pick, Yo La Tengo.
Nice.
Sadly overlooked by Robert Dimery. We're going to hash it out tonight and see if our team here agrees with me. I'm coming in as a yes, keep in mind.
Well, yeah, by virtue of you picking the album, sure.
By virtue of me picking the album, and we're going to be doing more of these as the summer progresses. But in any case, let's get to introducing our complainer co-host for the evening by way of an extra mean, extra snarky tweet length review. And I am going to send things first to Allan.
Thank you, Rob. I can feel the ears bleeding as 1 week spent listening to this long, aimless record finally comes to a close.
Okay, and let's send it next to Adam.
I had 2, and since there's only 3 of us tonight, maybe I'll grace you with both of them. So, hey everybody, this is Adam. Rob, you mentioned these guys are nerds, so maybe this one will appeal. I know what you're all thinking. This band is a Spanish phrase, so Adam is going to come up with some poorly translated insult in Spanish. Well, you're wrong. Instead, I'm going to deliver my tweet in Esperanto. No, I'm kidding. Only a loser would waste time with that translation. So instead, here's my tweet in Klingon. I am Romulus Reptakmu Botle Neho, which translates to, this album has no honor. It is only background noise for a Romulan dinner.
Oh my golly.
That was the nerd one, and here's the pithy one. All right. Just like our host Rob, that night that he and I got drunk and shared a bed, this album rolled off my back and left me disappointed and confused.
Oh my gosh. It's a good day to die for Yola Tengo.
It is.
What makes you think that anyone associated with this podcast would want to hear anything related to Star Trek, Adam?
Right, I had no idea. I'm just grasping at straws here, man.
Let the nerdery commence, my friends. And this is Rob here, and my mean tweet about Yola Tengo is: 3 music nerds of the highest order, armed with a combination of persistence and outright delusion, aim to rewrite the rules of the game, toiling thanklessly for years and eventually winning the respect of a small but fiercely loyal cadre of fans, only to blow it by making fun of beloved indie band Yola Tengo.
I thought you were going to reference the famous Onion headline about this band. If you guys ever seen that?
Yeah, what is it?
37 record store clerks feared dead in Yola Tango concert disaster.
It's funny because it's true.
Totally.
Okay. Well, let's get into it, guys.
Yeah.
Yola Tengo, it's nerd fuzz. And I'll just say right off the bat that I have a lot of nostalgia for this record. This was part of my entry into indie music, let's call it very generally. And many things followed after that. And I have always been more interested in the nerdier side of indie. So I do feel like the list has some quote-unquote indie music on it, the 1001 list that is. But it tends to default to the kind of cool guy, punk aesthetic, too cool for school version of indie music. Whereas I was weaned on They Might Be Giants.
There it is. Yep.
And then later, things like Yola Tengo. So,
Well, it's also, I think, the indie that ultimately became pretty ubiquitous. Sonic Youth and some of those bands that maybe started out on that side of things, but became household names in a way that Yola Tango has, I don't think, quite gotten to that point.
yeah. And so in my mind, I guess I'm where I'm coming from a little bit, and even where I was coming from as a teenager when I first heard this. In a weird way, I've always thought the point of indie was to play against the macho posturing of classic rock and even of punk music. Because I know the punks think they're posturing against classic rock. But in fact, I think nerdy stuff like this, nerdy, artsy, noisy stuff like this, in the vein of They Might Be Giants, one of my early favorites, is in fact a real answer to that.
There's nothing macho about this music, that's for sure.
Well, Rob, you drew a mental picture where you have a punk pushing against classic rock, these guys pushing against punk, and now we are going to complete the circle by pushing against Yola Tango.
All right. Should have been more like Steely Dan, guys.
Yeah, right. I had never heard a note of Yola Tango. I've heard the name my entire life. I associate these guys a lot with NPR, mostly because frequent guest on the show, Tony, used to do voiceover work for the NPR affiliate here in Philadelphia. So when I would listen to NPR, I would hear him come on, and Yola Tengo was always the band that was performing at World Cafe Live or some NPR event. So in my head, I have this like lockdown thing about NPR, and it sounds like it might be kind of in that vein, right? NPR is geared towards that indie scene. I did have another tweet that said they put the pretentious in the P of NPR. So
I think the story is going to reveal how remarkably unpretentious they are. And that, to me, is an important feature of this band.
okay. Now, I did have a bit of a journey this week, too. So going in, it's a long-ish album. I didn't realize that until, like the 45-minute mark. And I looked over, I was like, oh, there's still another almost 20 minutes left. It wasn't until probably the last 2 or 3 listens that I listened to it yesterday that it started to kind of hit a little bit. So, I mean, I definitely have complaints. I think I saw somewhere somebody called it not genre hopping, but it was like genre tourism is what they called this album, which I thought was an interesting term. I got some of that. I think they do things well on the album where I don't want to call it their lane, but I think they shine in certain genres, and in other ones, I think they come up a little short. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but it was a decent week, but I do have plenty of complaints coming up.
Interesting. Yeah, I am probably a little bit on the other side of the coin. Well, maybe I'm splitting the difference here because I'm definitely not a super fan, but I am pretty familiar with this group. I have not given them the discography treatment or anything, but this is their album I would say I probably know the best. And I will say on the whole, I've grown to really like them over the years. I definitely respect them. And yeah, I would consider myself a fan. I think that's fair. I do have to admit, though, I was actively resistant to these guys when they first came onto my radar, which is probably a little after they came onto Rob's radar. You were always slightly ahead of the curve than I was. But, I feel like back in college, there was a point where it seemed like everyone in our group discovered them at the exact same time. And I can see why that might be kind of a barrier to your point about like a perception of pretentiousness. It felt like this sort of pseudo hipster thing where like a high fidelity, oh, you've probably never heard of these guys, but actually everyone sort of had by that point. But, eventually I grew up, took my diapers off and would say that I've come to respect them. And in coming back to this record again now, what I found, I think, most paradoxical, I guess, is even though this record to me is full of individual elements and constituent parts that I do not like in isolation. It's too long. There's way too much feedbacky guitar. It's a little whiplashy, right? Some of that stuff is definitely still there. But on the whole, the end product I felt like is almost impossible to dislike. Some of those complaints I think are valid. I can maybe see why somebody wouldn't love it, but I felt like there's some kind of alchemy that they are getting at here. I think the good parts are exceptionally good. And I just felt like it's hard to not get the feeling that you're listening to something kind of special and a great album, actually.
Yeah, let me comment. I think that they are really good at atmosphere. So I found myself on this re-listen even a little bit surprised. And it brought me back to our Sonic Youth episode, which I also was surprised that I liked, because I generally have a resistance to noise as an aesthetic. Let me just say that. But then I listened to this and I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of fuzzy swells and walls. What I think Yo La Tengo does exceptionally well amidst that is they remain extremely melodic. In fact, I think one of the most impressive things they're able to do, and we'll talk about it in the context of some of the songs, is with that wall of fuzz guitar still managing to put melody first. Do you know what I mean? And noise for noise sake doesn't really do it for me. The other piece of this puzzle, and it's what we've been talking about, they are a band without hits to this day. They're one of these like long-running rock institutions that people know about and that have a lot of fans, but they don't have any hit songs. And thus they are free. When they play a show, you have no idea what they're going to play. And we're going to learn from their history also that they have a history as a cover band. So they're also, like some other bands we like that I won't be mentioning right now, likely to bust out any song in the Western catalog at any given moment and sort of do their version of it. And they're not beholden to playing a certain hit song or from songs from a certain period or anything like that. Similarly, they're not beholden to a specific genre. And I think in part because this is already their 8th record. And again, they're still going right now. Same group that made this record, still making records, still touring. They are really comfortable in their own skin. I think you hear that in the material. They've like grown into themselves. they do not care. They're not trying to please anyone but themselves, is the sense I get. This is playing off of what Allan said about it being something special. I do think you hear that in the music. You hear that they're pleasing themselves and going after their own aesthetic, and it's not really for anyone else. And for better or worse, it didn't really find the mass audience ever.
It's interesting that you mentioned the fact that they have no singles, which is obvious, but I kept thinking as I was listening to this, I feel like they could have written a bunch of radio bangers if they wanted to. And I'm not saying that they were purposely, maybe they were, I don't know, but it's easy to say someone could have been something that they weren't, whether it was intentional or not. But I think, especially in the 90s when this came out, although maybe more so in the early 90s, in that sort of grunge era, I think there are hooks all over this record. They don't last for very long. And there were times when I wish they leaned a little harder into a more traditional sort of pop direction. But the idea, to your point, Rob, of really strong with melody, I think if they had made that determination that we want to sell out, we want to be a radio band or an MTV band, they had the writing chops to do that. And I think also something that I never keyed in on in listening to them sort of casually over the years is how versatile the vocals were. We were joking around in our kind of pre-roll before we taped this about how oftentimes it comes off as a little bit mumbly and a little bit low energy, but there was range in the vocals that I don't think I really was aware of. You know, there's some songs where he's singing a little bit low, some songs that are singing high and falsetto and kind of pushing it a little bit. And yeah, I think the pop sensibility is absolutely there. And I think that does shine through some of the noisier, more annoying parts.
I agree they have great pop sensibility. And the other factor you're talking about is their experimentalism. And so maybe it would be even better to give you the context that I've always loved artsy, experimental pop music. That is even more specifically the lineage of something like They Might Be Giants in my mind, which again was my first favorite band when I was 13. It's the first concert I went to see with sometimes Complainer James. And by the way, the first place I ever heard Yola Tengo was on a mix CD that sometimes guest complainer and synth pervert James gave me in college, because he was the one who was on the cutting edge, I thought, of this kind of music.
Okay.
That mix CD had a couple Yola Tengo tracks. It had some Bell and Sebastian tracks, you know, a bunch of stuff like that. And from that, it led to me discovering a lot of other things that were happening below the surface. The Modest Mouse, the first Shins record, Spoon, the New Pornographers, Built to Spill. Like this whole world of, let's call it independent rock, that was bubbling under the surface. These bands were all touring in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some of them are still touring, but they had not really broken through. And I do think it's a limitation of the 1001 list, generally, partially because it's so British focused. They get a lot of this underground British stuff. But I think it is very accurate to say, and I think the story will reflect, that as the internet came online in the late 90s, and pop music, especially this, like smaller bands were getting bigger followings, partly in response to that, and partly because of the internet communities. And it led to this revival that I see as an important musical movement. I'm biased because I just lived through it and cared about it, of Baroque pop music that was itself a throwback to the 60s. Again, the Shins, Arcade Fire, to a lesser extent, stuff like the Killers, right? But a lot of it was fairly American in nature, and I do think the 1001 list misses a lot of that.
Sure.
I agree. I think the closest you get to a band like this on the list as far as an American, no longer indie, but what would have passed for that back in the day is a band like Wilco. Mm-hmm. But even they're not even in the same class.
They're opening for Wilco this summer, by the way.
Not surprising, not surprising.
That's about right, yeah. So you guys are both coming in as a revisit, right? Completely cold this week coming in. There were aspects of the overall album that I felt were inconsistent. And it wasn't the genre hopping. I'm fine with that. It almost seemed like at times there was a different producer in the room. They do the ambient chill thing. They do that kind of acoustic driven thing very well, but whenever they turn their amps up, it just sounds really amateur to me. And that's something that turned me off a little bit. That anytime there was a loud guitar, it wasn't even just that it was loud or distorted or noisy. It just sounded like they didn't know what they were doing. And at album 8, I don't know, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that was the aesthetic that came out of it. Because everything else in the album breathes. And then when they rock, it is so compressed that, again, it almost sounds like you're listening to a different band.
So you're talking about the engineering, not the song structure itself, right?
Correct, yeah. More of a sonic complaint, I'll say, than maybe the song structure or chord patterns or lyrics.
Right. Because what I was struck by listening this week to this record, and this is the first record by them I became familiar with, and it's the one I'm probably most familiar with, but I'm also pretty darn well acquainted with the 2 before this and the 2 after this. So I'm not a super fan. I should also say they're one of these bands that's had so long a career and so many records that to be a super fan is just so intimidating. Like, I don't have time for
38 albums or whatever, right?
But I know a fair amount of their material. I've seen them live on several occasions and enjoyed it. I will say, though, like, I think this does represent a peak for them in terms of the songwriting, the letting ideas develop, things like that. There are highlights from those other pieces, certainly. But to me, they feel patient here and they allow things to happen. And it is a bit of a long record, and it would be disingenuous for us not to mention that. But I had to admit that I found that didn't bother me as much because of some of the hopping around, because it's so atmospheric and a lot of it is mood setting.
Speaking of their many albums, we have to mention the best album title of all time that they came out with. I Am Not Afraid of You and I Will Beat Your Ass. Great album title.
That's awesome.
Yes, that is a great album title. And as we're going to see in the story too, they're an ornery band. They don't want to be stars. I do think that comes across pretty loud and clear. They want to keep doing what they're doing. They like and have liked for many, many years their status in their little corner of the world, which is, I think, part of why they covered that song on this record. It's an aesthetic, and they also have an aesthetic of, it's almost like an experimental version of a jam band, because you get the impression they do not play these songs the same way twice. Maybe that's an overstatement, but there's a constant reinvention aspect to what they are trying to do.
Well, they are a live experience. I will agree with that. I've only seen them once, and we may have even discussed this at the end of the last episode where we teed this up. I saw them about 5 minutes from my house in a 300-person venue. Obviously, they sold out, and so it was a lot of great energy, but I couldn't help but feeling when I was walking over there, are they going to feel like they've been playing for 30 years at this point? They're playing some 300 venue in Wilmington, Delaware. Are they going to mail it in or feel like, we've played festivals, this is just another night? But they were awesome. And to your point, Rob, I didn't know what to expect. They did a lot of, I don't remember who was doing what, but they did a fair bit of hopping around where maybe the guitar player was playing drums at a point and the bass players. So they mixed things up. They played some songs that I knew, only 2 songs off this album that they played, but they played some songs that I was familiar with, but they did not sound the way I remembered them. And there was zero sense of, I don't want to be here, or this gig is beneath us. It was very, very cool. And when you mentioned that they used to be a cover band, that also tracks now, because I don't know if they always do this in their shows, but they did a quiet set 1, a more loud set 2, and then just a bunch of covers for their encore.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Nice.
I would say the 3 or 4 times I saw them, I agree, they're an amazing live act. I saw them 2 nights in a row once, no repeats. And in general, they strike me, and from my experience, they're one of those bands that you never know what you're going to get. You could get a really noisy one. You could get a stripped down acoustic one. You could get an all covers set. You could get a no covers set. Who knows what's happening, right? It felt to me when I was seeing them, and I think the story supports this, that they're just trying to keep it interesting for themselves. And it is still interesting for them. And we haven't mentioned it yet. We'll get to it in the story, but the core of the band is a married couple, and they've been married for 40 years.
Somehow.
Wow.
The fact that that's even working that long, I think we all agree, is impressive, let alone being in a band, let alone not making that much money in a band, I assume.
Oof. Yeah, right. God. All right, well, good on them.
Well, and in terms of creative direction, and someone's got to call the shots in the band, I don't even see how you could survive that part of it, let alone thrive over that period of time.
Indeed. Okay. I am excited to get into the story of Yo La Tengo. Was very excited to dive into the research this week, so we're going to segue into telling that story leading up to and including I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One. But first, we're going to take a quick break. And we're back. Okay. First off, I should mention that bibliographically, I read a book called Big Day Coming, which was a biography of Yo La Tengo, but also was talking a lot about the rise of indie music and indie labels during that same period they were coming up, of which they were a part, as you're going to see. So I took a lot of information from that, as well as various interviews with the band. And so check out Big Day Coming.
Say that again fast, and it sounds like you're saying something different.
You said day, big day coming, not big. Okay.
Check out Big Day Coming. It's also the name of one of their songs.
All right, thanks for the clarification.
We pumped this into AI to animate our discussion. It's going to get real interesting.
Okay, let's set the scene here. It's Hoboken, New Jersey.
I've heard enough.
The Hoboken? All right.
Right across the river from Manhattan. Now, nowadays, it is gentrified and posh, but at the time, it was a broken down palace where a young couple trying to start a band could rent a 6-bedroom apartment for, wait for it, $65 a month.
It's still New Jersey, no matter how much you want to dress it up. Let's just be honest.
It is, but nowadays it is considered the highest rent part of that New Jersey system, I believe.
Absolutely.
Now, keep in mind, New York was also at a low point at this point in terms of high crime and relatively low prices.
It's Gotham City at that point.
However, music, of course, as we know from other episodes, was happening, right? This is the tail end of the CBGB's era. You know, there's a lot going on, right? And slowly but surely, a scene starts up in Hoboken around a bar called Maxwell's. And a band of scenesters, who initially call themselves A Worrying Thing, make it their home base. So, Yo La Tengo are the generation that grew up on punk, but found themselves just a little bit too old for hardcore, a little bit too weird for new wave, and like the subject matter of many of these songs suggest, they're kind of late bloomers. They're awkward, right? They take their time to work their way through the music and art scene in a variety of other ways before settling in and committing to making their own original music.
Well, they seem like they're good musicians too, so that kind of takes punk off the table at that point.
It does, but it's like they're kind of that generation, but they started their band a little later. Maybe they're just a little bit younger. I don't have all the birth dates of all the pioneers of this scene, but like they're just a little behind, and that amount of time makes a difference. So Ira Kaplan, the de facto leader of Yo La Tengo, was born 1957 in Queens. He sees the Beatles on Ed Sullivan at age 7, like many, many, many others, and his life has changed.
Wow.
He becomes obsessed with music. He listens to 45s all the time, especially after his family stereo gets equipped with headphones, which his father bought just to stop having to listen to Ira's music. And he tells an anecdote that like back in the day in the 60s, the way his dad would tell him that he had to come to dinner would be to flip the circuit breaker off. So that would be the way he would notice, because the headphones would click off.
Yeah, instead of just having a rational conversation with your child, just
Anything to avoid that.
passive-aggressive means.
By the way, this guy's a little older than I would have expected. So he's 70 now, which is, I don't know why. When I listened to this at the time, you know, the album we're talking about was mid-90s. So, that just 70 seems old.
Yeah, which means he's about 40 when they're making this.
Wow, I didn't even...
Yeah, right.
I did not even put that together. I mean, I've known they've played since when I saw him was in 2021, and he definitely seemed... He looked younger than me.
Well, there's not a lot of drugs in this band story. I'm going to blow your mind here.
Well, this is going to be a short episode, though.
Right.
Well, that's kind of my point. You're going to see that he had a fairly robust career before settling in and deciding to make his own music, right? So at 11 years old, Ira goes to the Fillmore in New York to see his first show. It's Country Joe and the Fish, plus an early Peter Green-led Fleetwood Mac.
Whoa.
And shortly thereafter, he decides to get a guitar. Honestly, though, it doesn't sound like he took to guitar very much. Maybe he still hasn't. He's pretty self-deprecating about his guitar ability. But he seemed to be naturally better at the family piano, and he starts his first band at age 15. It is a 7-piece called Heat Wave. It's ambitious.
I mean, that's aggressive. Yes, agreed.
I didn't even have 7 friends in high school, let alone enough to put together a 7-piece.
Flash forward a little later, he goes to college at the relatively nearby Sarah Lawrence. He's coming down to Manhattan constantly to see shows. This is now the late 70s. The scene is happening. CBGB's is just one example of many. He's seeing bands like Television and the New York Dolls, all kinds of other classic stuff. He sees Talking Heads play as a trio before they add Jerry Harrison. And it's around this time he gets asked to do a weekly column on punk music. You see, the old guard of music writers had zero interest in this young person's music. And so he gets an opportunity. He starts writing. And after college, he parlays that into a weekly music column for a paper called the Soho Weekly. I think he wrote for a few different papers, including the Village Voice.
Ooh.
And he ends up writing that column for 5 years, over 200 reviews. Around 1980, 1981, he's getting mentioned in the same breath as guys like Robert Christgau. Robert Christgau is his coworker.
Whoa.
So it's relevant because we're talking about a real musician's musician here, as we already mentioned.
Yeah.
And Yo La Tengo are most definitely a band that guys in bands love, right? And you mentioned the Onion article. It's accurate, right? It's partly because these guys came through a system where they were music reviewers, they were show promoters, they briefly flirted with running an independent label, very briefly. They would DJ cool clubs around town and play cool music, and they cultivated that personality before they even started this band.
They're a band's band, for sure. I would agree with that.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is, doing a column like this, it really shapes and refines Ira's taste. He gets to do some bigger assignments during this period. Like, for instance, he gets to tour briefly with Emmylou Harris and Willie Nelson. And though he likes music like that quite a bit, he quickly figures out that that's just not what he's interested in pursuing, that kind of big rock journalistic career. And the anecdote was that this culminates when he's sent to cover Kiss in the early 80s. He walks in to the backstage on No Sleep, an avid Kiss hater. And he pretty much goes downhill from there. He realizes this is not for me.
Kiss haters, there's none of them.
So let's hop over to his collaborator and his wife, drummer in Yo La Tengo, Georgia Hubley. She grew up in Manhattan. Her dad worked for Disney in the very early days, starting as an apprentice animator on Snow White, and eventually getting selected to be one of the key animation directors for Fantasia.
Damn.
Whoa. That's crazy.
Right, hand cramps all over the place, pumping that thing out.
Now, he ends up getting fired from Disney after participating in a union strike, but along with George's mother, starts his own animation studio, continues to have success in collaboration with other ex-Disney folks. Believe it or not, the two of George's parents working together as animators nets them 7 Oscar nominations and 3 Oscar wins.
Damn.
Wow.
Collectively,
Because they ran their own firm.
Jeez.
And I think it was a lot of these short films. Now, I hadn't heard of any of the pieces they won for. However, I think what you will recognize is that in 1949, he creates a character based on his elderly uncle, who is quite nearsighted, and based just on that simple premise, hilarity ensues. The character is called Mr. Magoo.
what?
Oh my God. He invented Mr. Magoo.
Yo La Tengo is founded on Magoo money, people. I'm blowing this story wide open.
Dude, this is the expose I've been waiting for.
So they're Nepo babies, is what you're telling me.
Something tells me that still was not like super lucrative, although maybe a great story.
It's so funny to me that even in our generation, we somehow know who Mr. Magoo is, like this cartoon from the 50s.
50 years before we were born, right? Well, 30 years, but still.
Oh, you know what? Hilarious actually is I think it was at that show that before the show was started, during the sort of pre-roll for whatever was about to happen, they were just straight up playing Tom and Jerry on the one screen in this little place. And I was thinking the same thing, like this felt old 40 years ago and it was already decades old by that point.
Right. Indeed. I wonder if kids today are even watching The Simpsons and Itchy and Scratchy and realize that it is a reference to Tom and Jerry.
Oh, wow.
My kids watch it all the time. They do not know that.
Anyway, back to Georgia. So she's from this family of animators. She and her sister dabbled in animation as well. So that's a very plausible anecdote, what you just said, Allan, that they were playing Tom and Jerry. But as a kid, she plays around with guitar and piano. But one day she sees Keith Moon on a movie screen and she's like, he looks like he's having fun. So she takes up the drums.
Oh, that's awesome.
She took up drugs, is what I was saying.
Again, these people seem so remarkably low-key and chill. Like they'd just be the best house guest you could ever have.
She's not driving a car into a pool in L.A. at any point?
No, there's no craziness. There's only wry wit to be found here.
All right.
They are extremely low-key. In fact, I listened to an interview where they were talking a little bit about this album, and they mentioned, I think we already alluded to this idea of this being their, I don't know, most heralded, or people generally find this to be their strongest album. And they were saying they agree with it, that when someone comes up to the merch table and asks like, hey, what do you recommend we get into? I liked your show. They kind of always recommend this album. But the reason I brought that up was because as much as they seem like nice people, they seem like a little bit of a tough interview, because for all the low energy vocals that show up on here, they talk the same way. Like it didn't seem like they didn't want to be there, but it sounded like pulling teeth a little bit to just get them to really say much of anything. They're definitely a very low key group of people, it seems like.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think they like keeping things close to the vest too. That's part of their, if we can call it a strategy for their band. For instance, the title of this record, they've sort of coyly said, oh, it's from a movie. And then the interviewer will be like, which one? I don't know. You'll have to find out. Won't that be an exciting discovery when one day you're watching TV and you hear that?
Some Disney deep cut that...
Or it just could be a complete fabrication. It's unclear. So now flashback to the scene at a club called Maxwell's in Hoboken, where Georgia and Ira first meet, seeing a band called the Feelies. They become inseparable shortly after. And again, Hoboken is just starting its slow climb into gentrification. Maxwell's becomes a hip spot, in part because there were just so many clubs and so many bands throughout this whole area. You know, they needed more places to play, and Maxwell's is hosting bands, right? The first music the two play together is in a party band, and Ira decides that he doesn't just want to be a cover band, not just any cover band. He wants to be a cover band that never, ever plays the same song twice.
Not just that night, like ever.
Correct.
Whoa, that is ambitious.
Which is insane.
That's crazy.
We're going to play Pour Some Sugar on Me once.
You better plan it right.
Yes. This is an important part of Yo La Tengo's origin story, because they end up learning like 200 plus songs.
Jeez.
Everything from obscure Velvet Underground covers and Modern Lovers songs to old Beach Boys songs and 60s pop hits. And you get the idea. Safe to say that covers are always a huge part of their identity as a group, and it starts here, right? There's two covers on this album, for instance.
Right.
So during this period, the couple also starts promoting shows at Maxwell's and elsewhere. They book what we would now consider big touring bands, like the Minutemen, the Replacements, the Violent Femmes. They even briefly try to release a record for a friend's band with their own label imprint, but they quickly decided that was not the path for them. And at some point, watching these young, exciting bands, Ira's like, we should be in a real band. Now, only a couple problems stand in their way. Problem one, they are 27 now. Elder statesmen, practically, in a world of young people.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Problem two, neither of them wants to sing. Now, they eventually do, but they don't want to. And I think you could still hear that from what's on the tape.
I thought you said they grew in their confidence. All right. If this is their confidence peak, then you're right. That's interesting.
I think one of the things they do well is they made the lack of confidence work for them. Like, they built the songs around that, and thus it kind of works.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's probably what took them some time. But okay, I get what you mean. It's definitely a not overly confident delivery. Not always on key either, but again, it doesn't bother me.
Well, look, someone's got to stand behind the Marshall stack and just crank out feedback for a half hour. You can't sing while you're doing that.
I'm pretty sure one time I saw Ira and he was doing like a noise solo, and there was one of those poles in the middle of the stage, and he was just rubbing the electric guitar on the pole for like a while.
Man, you gotta make it happen.
But they soldier on anyway, playing what Ira describes as timid folk rock. This is the very early days of Yo La Tengo. They have a rotating cast of bass players, a rotating cast of second guitar players, and they quickly get a Wednesday night residency at this place, Maxwell's. This really does become their home. You know, they've already been hanging out there extensively. They've been booking shows there. They know the owners. It makes it easy for them to make that their home base. Now, fun fact about Maxwell's, I've never been personally, and I believe it's gone now, R.I.P. Allan's favorite Springsteen song, Glory Days, the music video, was shot in the back room of Maxwell's.
Whoa.
Oh my gosh.
Ira and Georgia are extras in the video.
Get out.
And look, to throw Allan a bone here, that video is so over the top and it is ridiculously embarrassing. It is a damn shame because it's the visual representation of a top-notch piece of Americana songwriting from a modern master of the craft, Bruce Forever.
He calls a baseball speedball. What the fuck is that?
That's so upsetting.
I did watch the video, though, and it's really cringeworthy.
Well, now I might have to go into some sadism here and watch that.
So let's talk about the name. The party band they were in was called simply Georgia and Those Guys. And for their new band, they briefly land on previously mentioned name A Worrying Thing, but quickly consult a book about the history of the Mets, who Ira grew up loving, that's a baseball team, and find Yola Tengo. And the story of that goes that one of the first Latino pro baseball players and another guy, another outfielder, kept running into each other. And the American outfielder was shouting, "I got it." And the other guy wasn't hearing that, and they were still just banging heads together.
Got it.
And so it was suggested to him that he try to convert that to Spanish, and that is where Yola Tengo comes from.
That's a deep cut.
Which is hilarious. I never knew that until I read a little bit, but also throwing a bone to any of our local Philly area people. The Mets, by the way, huge rival, and if you're a Philadelphia Phillies fan, you hate the Mets. But the guy who said that, not the Hispanic guy, the other guy, was Richie Ashburn, who that was his last year playing baseball. He played 1 year with the Mets, but he played most of the rest of his career with the Phillies. He's like one of the most legendary Phillies of all time. In fact, there's like a place, sort of an area in their ballpark that's called Ashburn Alley.
Ashburn Alley? Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
That's cool.
for our local folks.
Did not know that. Well, and while we're on the topic of baseball, fun fact about Hoboken, it's where very early New York ball players went to practice and effectively outline the official rules of the game of baseball as we know it now. So stuff like the angle of the foul line and the distance between bases was determined through trial and error in Hoboken.
Whoa. Oh, interesting.
Okay, so now it's 1985. Yola Tengo released their first single. It's called The River of Water, followed by their first release called Ride the Tiger, which was hailed by the likes of Spin magazine as the type of rock and roll that gets you all fired up to proofread some copy. It is a slow start to what will become a long-running band. I am not familiar with Ride the Tiger. In the coming years, though, they tour, they release another album called New Wave Hot Dogs, then one called President Yola Tengo. Then they release a covers album that contains 1/3 original material and call it Fake Book, which is actually the first one that really starts to get them noticed.
How are they funding these? Are they just doing it out of their pocket, using the money from the cover gig and the vertical at the Maxwell's?
This is Mr. Magoo money.
It's partly that, and they're working with very small labels, getting some funding out of that. They don't really have distribution, and they're maintaining other jobs.
Okay.
They maintain other jobs for a while yet, actually.
Like day jobs, basically.
Day jobs, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or other jobs within music, like DJing or being the sound guy or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, like you said, they were.
During that time, they cycle through half a dozen or more bass players and other guitar players. They come in and out of the band. Sometimes Ira and Georgia play the shows as just the two of them. It is loose, to say the least. They continue to have these straight jobs. Like I said, they get paid through writing some music reviews, working the soundboard, DJing, whatever. Now, the good news is that as this is happening, as they are coming up, the American Indie Rock network of clubs and zines and houses that will let a band crash has been at least somewhat established in the preceding years. So they are, in a sense, second wave indie, taking at least some advantage of the trails blazed by the likes of bands we already mentioned, like the Minutemen or the Replacements or Black Flag, right? Things that get passed around, handbooks of like, well, this is where you can go and this is who you need to call and to figure out how to make your tour work in a DIY way. So, because recall, right, if you go back to the 70s, there was none of that. And I remember specifically from the Big Star episode, we talked about how they just had no clue to distribute their record. None.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Or to set up tours or any of that. And because the only way to do it was through major label backing and with connections. And that was around the time that was starting to change. And that's what the term indie originally meant, was bands that really were figuring out how to do that on their own, book their own shows, do it on the cheap, and sell records that way through a network of house parties and crash pads and things like that.
Without needing Columbia Records behind.
Correct. And they could still make a living at it without having the backing of a major label.
Right.
But it was still it was a relatively new thing, but Yo La Tengo are coming a little bit as a second wave, so it's a little more established, and they have friends in that community, so that makes it easier for them.
Well, and just to think about how much harder it was back then to do DIY than it is now. You know, we talked about the Minutemen a few times already, but when we did that episode, that was like their whole ethos, and it's so much more doable now. Although it's a sort of sea of folks doing it, it's harder to maybe cut through. Yeah, but it meant a little bit more back then, I think.
Well, it feels like the standard now versus back then it was more of a badge of a choice. Yeah, or it seemed a little like a choice you might be making, right?
Right.
Okay, but as the 80s are coming to a close, many of those first wave indies had burned out. Drugs, alcohol, death, in the case of the Minutemen. And some of them that stuck it out became college rock breakthrough hits, like REM would be an example. Yo La Tengo is neither of these things. They just kept going. They toured America, they toured Europe, they hung in there doing only exactly what they wanted to do. And again, I think that's another ingredient of why they're beloved. So actually, let's talk about that. What are the ingredients of a great long-running and not overly successful band? Because Yo La Tengo are still going today without a major hit of any kind. How can that be? Well, one, they're comfortable with themselves. There's like an everyman quality to them that when people do find them, I think they pick up on that. Not just in the interviews, but in the music as well. And it's unfussy music, very generally speaking, right? They're not pouring over it and trying to produce it to death and make it perfect.
Yeah, oh, they are not doing that.
But the ultimate effect, right, is that they do sound like normal people who are just hanging out, making music that they like. They're pulling from various genres, various time periods. They know lots and lots of songs. We've already talked about it, popular ones and obscure ones. And I think they're really just fans first. So to me, that's another trend that's really, really, really common now. We started this podcast as fans of music, of course. And I think a lot of bands would wear that badge proudly. Like, well, I'm an appreciator of music and that's why I'm doing it. I think that's just really central to their thing.
Well, I think being able to carve out a career over that amount of time when it's hard to think about what's the moneymaker. I mean, this is not a perfect comparison, but if you think of a band like Fish, who is very popular but does not have any hits. They had an MTV video or two, but they tour and they tour and they tour and they sell out shows, and that's what sustains them. But a group like this, I talked about them seeing them at a 300-person music hall just a few years ago. They're just making it work. They're probably not crushing album sales. They're not packing arenas. It seems extremely difficult to carve out a 30 plus 40-year career that way.
That is pretty remarkable.
I don't have access to their financial records, obviously, but I have to imagine that part of it is they're just okay with not making a lot of money.
Right. The balance between burning out and cruising comfortably. Musicians are often lazy. And if you can find that sweet spot like they did versus like a Dave Grohl who was so driven that he winds up being redoing the drums because they weren't good enough and now, superstars and all that stuff. So it's an interesting mix there where maybe they just knew what they wanted and they didn't want to give any more.
History is littered with examples of people who have said so-and-so dropped out of the band because he wanted to go to law school or wanted to pursue an actual career where he could rely on a steady check, and maybe the Disney money was flowing. But I have much more respect in knowing this backstory and how they made this all work.
Yeah, I think in our culture in particular in America, but generally in the world, we very much put on a pedestal people who have a lot of driving ambition. And I totally understand why that is. They do impressive things. But we often overlook people who are okay with their little area, whatever they've carved out, as long as they get to do what they want to do and do things they think are cool and or fun. That's the impression I get from this band, certainly now, but I think even around the time they're making this record, the time period we're in now, in the story, they just felt like it's okay because I like what I'm doing. I'm not beholden to anybody to do anything in particular, and I'm okay with just eking out a living.
Well, I guess that's how you look like you're 45 when you're actually 70 years old playing guitar on stage, so...
So look, each release, they are picking up a little more cred and some more fans, but it's slow going. Their fourth album that I already mentioned, Fake Book, that's where the world starts to take a little notice, and they get a deal with a slightly bigger indie called Bar None. Bar None's marquee band at the time was none other than They Might Be Giants, which gives you a sense of the scale here.
Yes. Yeah.
But they were considered a bigger indie with some bigger distribution options, and Bar None really convinced them to lean into making the band a little more of a business venture. For instance, they convinced them on the very next tour after they signed, you should buy the van instead of renting it. Like, you're in this game now.
Good point.
You can get a van for $500.
They said that at this point, about 50% of their total income was coming from the band. And that was about the moment they said, you know what, we should just commit to this and quit the day jobs and lean in a little farther.
Nice. Okay.
And luckily, it's right around this time that yet another bass player enters the picture. The one that stuck with them and the one that still plays with them today. His name is James Magoo. He was born in Baltimore, and he'd been playing in bands since college as well. He is significantly younger than the other two, I think by about close to 10 years. But college, James Magoo, interestingly enough, was in a group called Ectoslavia. He went to school at UVA. And guess who else was in Ectoslavia? Stephen Malkmus and a few others before those guys returned to California and formed Pavement.
Wow. All right.
And that brings us to everyone's favorite segment ever, undisputed. It is called Yo La Tengo by the Numbers.
Yes! Let's do it. Adam is exalted.
Sorry, I am running around in the room back here.
First number I want to give to you guys is 15. James Magoo, when he joins the band, is bass player number 15 in Yo La Tengo's history.
Damn.
It's safe to say they had more or less become resigned to never finding a permanent member, and they even insisted on referring to James as 15 only as his name for the first few months.
That's brutal.
Jeez, it's like the Spinal Tap of bassists. Look, a bassist is pretty much there for the hang. If you can't find someone that just wants to ride along with you, then that's tough.
And you're the third member with a married couple.
Ooh.
That's a challenging scenario, I would say.
It explains it.
And it sounds like at times they didn't even let him play bass on this album. So I don't know. Maybe they didn't.
It's true. They do quite a bit of rotating. I think that's part of the things they liked about him, though, is that he was comfortable on guitar and drums.
You're going to play this really dexterous bass riff for 6 minutes.
Next number I want to throw out to you is 24, as in the number of minutes in the intended single that Ira once handed over to his label. The label complained, it's a 24-minute single, man. And Ira's response was, yeah, but it feels like 17.
That's just your opinion, man.
So in his mind, 17 minutes is still okay for a radio single. That's good.
They do what they want is the point of that story.
Yeah,
you know?
and I'm sorry, why did these guys not have any singles? You said?
Next number I want to throw out to you is 423. That is the spot this album took on the 1001 rival list, Rolling Stone's The 500 Greatest Albums of All Time.
Jeez.
But of course, no spot on the 1001 list, at least not yet. Hence our glaring omissions entry tonight. And there are more of those coming up, including our audience picks later this summer. So hop over to our completely free Patreon page if you want to suggest some great options for glaring omissions, or just vote on the handful that we winnow down for you. And the last number I want to throw out to you is countless, as in the ways to misspell Yo La Tengo's name in print, on marquees, and even in our text string.
Yami Tango.
Wait, who?
Right.
The band has saved as many examples as possible in an archive, and they include Wo La Tengo, Yo Le Tengo, Yo La Tango, Yo Lo Tango, which is how Conan O'Brien announced them on their very first television performance.
No way.
Ya Lo Tango, and finally on a marquee in Florida on their tour one time, Ya Lo Tango, getting every single vowel wrong somehow.
Yeah, this information is easily verifiable, by the way. It's it's like at work when someone spells your name wrong and you're like, I just sent you an email with my name spelled correctly on it. That's very weird.
In the pre-internet days, that was, of course, harder, and they do have a difficult name. They take it in stride, by the way, and they agree they did this to themselves. That's part of why they're keeping the archive. And we can see that you two have made a questionable decision for yourself. allowing yourself to be entranced even briefly by our raconteuring tonight. I'd wager a vintage DX7 that you too have opinions locked in your head right now or being shouted at the clouds as you listen to us babble on. Let those opinions be heard right at this moment. There's a comment thread about this episode and this album on patreon.com/1001 album complaints. It is 100% free. You can vote on whether this is truly a must listen, add back to the 1001 list, and tell us what we missed or what we messed up. Your fellow complainers are there now. Our community is growing. Join us. And for that, I thank you in advance. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wait, Rob, did you mention the other contenders that this album beat out in our vote? Are we doing that? Or are we saving those for future churn?
Yeah, good question. No, I did not mention those, Allan. I would like to get to those someday. You know, I made all the suggestions, but I still think the audience is wrong somehow in what they chose. You missed out on hearing us do the Unicorns Who Will Cut Our Hair When We Are Gone, another weird pop experimental classic, and Bob Seger's Stranger in Town, which is way better than you think it is.
Better be.
Actually, that Bob Seger on Stranger in Town, he kind of looks like a young Allan to me.
One time, probably about 10 years ago, I shaved into what I thought used to be called a handlebar, but it's actually called a Fu Manchu, the cumbersome 7 Mary 3 style.
Oh, yeah.
So, of course. Glad you clarified.
Yeah, for those who are wondering. But I did get several Bob Seger comments on that mustache. So
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I could see that. Yeah.
You used to have quite a mane of long hair as well. Yeah, so it checks out. Hopefully we'll get to those records at another time. But for now, back to our story of Yo La Tengo. So within a few months of playing shows and rehearsing with James Magoo, they start to write new material together, and Ira and Georgia quickly realize the whole thing is gelling in a new way. They're feeling very optimistic that James is finally their musical soulmate. Together as a band, they release a record called May I Sing With Me on a small indie out of Kentucky. So they're kind of bouncing around indie labels at this point. I guess everyone believes in them and then is disappointed by their record sales. But it's in the next album that the next important puzzle piece appears for Yo La Tengo. It is called Matador Records. It is just starting out at the time, and they pick up Yo La Tengo for their 6th album called Painful. Now, Matador had only started a couple years before, but they were about to become an indie powerhouse, releasing so many seminal records from the likes of Belle and Sebastian, Cat Power, The New Pornographers, Interpol, and importantly, in 1992, they were just starting to gain traction from having released the first Pavement LP called Slanted and Enchanted.
Also, a super cool name for a record label, I must say.
Great name for a record label. So Yo La Tengo signs with the label and is still releasing albums with them as of 2023.
I mean, it's cool that they didn't jump ship or start their own thing, I guess.
I mean, they might not have been able to find anybody better, let's be honest. Again, I don't know.
Well, I want to emphasize that at this point in the music business, indie is a growing force. They're getting college radio play. They're selling to collectors through zines. They're getting some placement on MTV as MTV's programming expands into late night shows like 120 Minutes. And part of it is, again, we're in the second wave. So Matador Records is the second wave, and that's important in that both bands and labels had learned from the mistakes of Wave 1. Matador is a terrific example of guys who founded it after already having been in the game for a while, learning from the ups and downs of other labels, and coming into Matador with an extra dose of business savvy. And in some ways, Yo La Tengo is the band version of that. I wouldn't exactly call them business savvy, but they're a little more... They're stable, I guess, is their energy.
Well, they seem like they understand the industry. If they had more business savvy, they would have written more pop.
And they're also not trashing places, and they don't have drug problems, and they're not womanizing and having fights and stuff. So is that kind of the stability aspect as well?
Yes, they're kind of a lifestyle band, is my point. They solve some of the ways that broke bands up and probably broke relationships up as well, and just decided to... not kowtow to the industry that they had some understanding of, but just kind of do it for the long haul.
Well, it's kind of hard to womanize when your wife is in the band.
That's a very good point.
So I should mention that this release, Painful, also represents this new trio, Yo La Tengo, even though it's their 6th album. It's a new group, effectively, because of the addition of James Magoo. They're finding their sound in a blend of noise and atmosphere. So a lot of people... feel like this is the first true Yo La Tengo record, even the big fans of the band. And I already heard in the comments when we announced this record being covered that Painful was a better record. Hard disagree, but it's at least in the same vein. I think that they're starting down this path, and you would find the band at least recognizable on that record. So now with James in the band, they're practicing 5 days a week. Again, they've committed to being in the band. And though they are a trio, like we've already been saying, they aren't limited to their chosen instruments. James plays guitar sometimes. He plays drums sometimes. I think they all rotate around all the instruments sometimes. They bring an organ on their tour, and they all rotate who's playing it at various points in the show. Sometimes they're all playing keyboards. Sometimes two people are playing drums. You get the point, right? You know, it might seem to us wizened old stagehands that that's a cheap trick, if you will, to switch instruments. But for an audience, it really livens up what is going on. It like extends the magic trick in a significant way. And I think bands sometimes overlook that and think of it as a little shticky, when in fact, I think it can be really helpful. And especially if it feels true to whatever the heck you're doing. Like, well, this is the way we were jamming in this configuration, and this is how we wrote the song. So obviously we're going to play it this way, kind of thing.
It's fun for the band too. And like you're saying, these guys are in it not solely for themselves, but they don't really care. If I could have hopped around to a bunch of different instruments, that would have been great. You know, it's fun.
Totally. It's fun. It exudes the idea that they're having fun as well.
Right.
When I saw Wolfpack 2 years ago, they were also switching instruments quite a lot. Different guys playing the drums, different guys playing guitar. Only one guy playing bass, though, I should point out.
Oh, no one else is playing bass in that band. That's.
But, you know, you would think that the drums would normally be one that you wouldn't switch out on as much, but they do.
Right.
Well, Wolfpack's got a weird thing where the band leader plays drums half the time and then also sings. Like, they've got two guys who are amazing singers and amazing drummers, and I don't know how they pick what they do, but.
Correct, indeed. So now, Painful, their sixth full-length record, sells 30,000 copies. It is a big step forward. They got their band locked in now. They got a record label that believes in them and is on the rise as a label, and they've entered the conversation. But the other indies of the day, keep in mind, we're like in 1993 territory, 1994, they're selling millions. So they are a far cry from the big show. Some version of indie has gone mainstream via Nevermind and record labels like Sub Pop and things like that, and other records we've covered, but not them. The follow-up is called Electro Pura. It's named after a defunct soda brand that they once saw in Mexico. That one sells closer to 50,000 copies, so they are on an upward swing.
All right.
Ira's old co-worker, Robert Christgau, gives that one an A-, saying it is a brimful of punk, fuzz, feedback, noise, and the lovingly amped squelches of fingers sliding off strings. Their seventh album is a subcultural tour de force.
I love the sound of the fingers on the strings.
You mean he was playing guitar? All right, come on, Chris Gal. Just stop, dude.
Fun little side note, really just for you guys here in the studio. In that particular edition of the Village Voice, which I was looking at, Robert Christgau's Dud of the Month award went to Medeski, Martin, and Wood's Friday Afternoon in the Universe. He called it Bad Brubeck, Jimmy Smith as Fusion, or soundtracks for arty shorts about urban hyperactivity. Please let me out of the basement before they think of something new.
Oh, God.
That would have pissed off college us.
Yes.
I'm certain.
So now, finally, they are poised to make tonight's album, I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One. They head to Nashville to work at House of David Studios. After the relative indie splash of Painful, I should say, it was suggested that Yo La Tengo look for a little more outside help to produce their records, someone who could help them refine their noisy pop sound. And on Electro Pura, they meet and work with producer Roger Motenot, who ends up producing a string of albums with them, including this one tonight. And I think one of the reasons they liked him is that he had worked with both pop artists as well as avant-garde experimental types like John Zorn or Lou Reed in the past. Keep in mind, a lot of these songs are being honed over extremely varied live performances night after night. They don't like playing the same song the same way. It comes from that old cover band idea of like, don't play the same things.
Yeah.
And they're switching instruments within the same song sometimes. And they're also jamming a lot and writing out of jams.
Well, I think as a band, too, you also don't know sometimes what a song even is until you work it out live. It'll start to take on a feel of its own that it's hard to dictate in advance. So the way that they seem to put some of these songs together is it's almost sound like they're coming loosely from jams, or they're just taking a segment and running with it. I think that makes sense to work that out live.
Yeah, they are kind of like a noisy experimental version of a jam band. I think that I already said that once, but that thought kept occurring to me that they're constantly, I think, experimenting with format and sounds and the instrument switching. And so anyway, you get on this record, all the songs that aren't covers are attributed to all three of them together as a group, which, by the way, for the kids, I'm sure we've mentioned it before, that's another way to keep groups together. Just in case there is any success, you don't want one songwriter making a whole bunch of money and the rest of the band getting a pittance.
Angry and building resentment. Yeah.
That's it. I haven't followed that advice myself.
If you want to keep your 15th bass player, you better spread things out equitably. All right.
Some comments on the sounds they make from the band, thinking back to that time. Ira claims that for a long, long time, he can only solo on one string at a time. And then he pauses and says, I still do that.
That checks out. He doesn't sound like a virtuoso.
It does, but I actually think he's a better guitar player than I now think he's a good guitar player. I think he has taste.
Okay.
But he's not flashy, certainly.
Well, in a way, I think the constraint can probably help you not noodle, and you still have all the same notes on the string, so you have to just be a little more thoughtful about which note you play, I guess.
I like this. George's comment on what she wants her drums to sound like. She said, I don't want it to sound like the snare drum and its little friend. And I think she's just talking about making the snare drum a little smaller. Maybe it's coming out of that like 80s big reverby shotgun snare thing.
Boom. Okay.
She's like, I saw Keith Moon that one time. I don't want to hear that.
Not that.
I Can Hear the Heart Beating As One comes out in April 1997. It gets amazing reviews. Robert Christgau, writing for The Village Voice, gives it an A.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The curmudgeon of all curmudgeons says, no one has made more of bohemian, easy-listening cocktail samba than Ira Kaplan and Georgia Hubley, boho dream couple and cultural miniaturists. Modest rather than narrow, their joy and sadness are no less sweet or intense, for the larger life they know nothing of. And the rest of the press fall in line. It's favorably reviewed in NME, Rolling Stone, the young and hungry up-and-coming Pitchfork website. Spin Magazine gives it a 9 out of 10, although hilariously, that longer form review is also written by Robert Christgau.
There are other music writers out there. You know?
I was going to say.
Right. Well, they could have had Ira write it, I guess. That would have been funny.
Yeah, I guess he was unavailable.
And in that initial run, this record sells around 300,000 copies.
Whoa. That's big for them, right?
So a huge leap forward for them, ends up being their biggest selling record ever. Of course, they don't know that at the time. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, its legacy reaches much, much farther than that. Partly because something new is just starting to take hold on college campuses. It's called methamphetamine. No. Back in 1995, a new compressed audio file format called the MP3 was created. And it really started to take hold when peer-to-peer service Napster launched in 1999. And while in the record industry generally, record sales immediately plummeted, there's an argument to be made that small bands like Yo La Tengo, for them, a combo of illegal MP3 sharing combined with the overall growing power of the internet helped turn them into at least dorm room names, not exactly household names.
Right.
If you're not Metallica or U2, what are you cannibalizing from, really?
Exactly. And so I think in a way, it kind of hit at the perfect time. They had just made this great record. They did get a pretty solid amount of sales. And then in the next 5 years, this thing called Napster comes online and I think helps boost their profile quite a bit because it's already a critical darling, but it's the kind of thing that you need a friend to introduce you to. Well, the internet is your friend, or Napster is your friend, right? So because they had spent 8 full albums honing their sound, playing unpredictable, exciting live shows all the time, including there was like a stunt on the radio where they agreed to play literally any song a listener could request for a charity benefit.
Oh, that's cool.
Which apparently it went very well. They cultivate a very cool fan base, right? Another thing that they started doing in the 90s and have continued I think most years until Maxwell's closed, is they started doing 8 nights of Hanukkah, all charity shows, all 8 nights they play. They invite different guests to come, including comedians and other friends, and it's usually a huge success, raises a bunch of money for charity. But, you know, their air of hipness continues, right? Culminating in their greatest career achievement, possibly the greatest achievement anyone could ever hope for.
Having their name mispronounced by Conan.
They were asked to record a psych version of the Simpsons theme song, which aired in, wait for it, 1998. So, Adam, you have heard this band before.
Oh, my God. That's crazy. I can't think of it right now, but you're right. I absolutely have seen whatever episode it was.
Was it on like a Treehouse of Horrors or something?
I'm not sure which episode it was on. It's possible, but this was peak Simpsons era, and it reflects how they were. Cool people knew who they were already and were kind of asking them to do things, and they were kind of behind the scenes, right? Other cool society highlights from around that time, the video they shot for their second single off this record, Sugar Cube, stars Bob Odenkirk, a.k.a. Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad, and David Cross, a.k.a. Tobias Funke from Arrested Development, who were, of course, on Mr. Show at the time. They're in the video together because they were huge fans.
That checks out.
The original Never Nude.
Exactly. So Yo La Tengo is embraced by comedians generally, as well as other people in bands, and they've had this long history since around that time of having hip underground comics open for them or make special appearances at their shows or sing something. So that cultivation has continued to pay off, and they continue to make connections with other somewhat undeniably cool people, let's say. I don't know. I don't think it gets much cooler than Mr. Show at that time.
Yeah, wasn't Jack Black in that video as well? Like a pre-School of Rock Jack Black, if I'm not mistaken?
I don't think he is, but it does kind of have a School of Rock flavor. That might be why you're getting confused, but it is pre-School of Rock.
Maybe that is.
The premise of the video is that they are teaching rock to students. Anyway, the trio, Yo La Tengo, they're still together. They're still touring, at least occasionally. They're still making records. Allan mentioned one of their album titles, which is I Am Not Afraid of You and I Will Beat Your Ass. And they released their 17th full length in 2023 on Matador Records. I highly recommend seeing this band live if you have a chance. They are definitely an experience. And thus concludes our story of Yo La Tengo.
Nice.
Well, you might not have many chances because if you look on their website now, which, by the way, is the most modest website, there's not even an About Us page. It's literally just 3 links.
Is it a Craigslist posting that just keeps getting renewed?
It kind of looks like it. But on their schedule for the rest of the year, they only have 1 gig, which is the aforementioned Wilco gig that you talked about, Rob. So it doesn't seem like they're playing much this year.
I think they tour. I think they've always kind of toured sporadically. So if you have a chance, check them out. But I have a feeling they will continue playing for a little bit longer. But of course, who knows, right? Give it your best shot. Like you said, they're getting up there in age.
Well, they still have a P.O. box in Hoboken, apparently, according to their website. So,
all right, let's get into the songs, gents. And we're going to start with the song Moby Octopad.
in the unlikely event that you've ever wanted to hear what it sounds like for an indie rock band to play jazz, this might be your best shot.
Yeah, I love this. Dope bass line, wall of fuzz, repeated weird chunky piano line. It's got a really good mix to me of groove and experiment. Great shaker take.
Right. I will give it to the bass player, man. It's a simple bass line, but to do that for 5 minutes, although they do have a breakdown of 247, and in my head, I was picturing they built that in just so the guy could shake his fingers out on stage to like stretch them a little bit and then go right back into it. Because doing that for 5.
Dude, I had a note about 247 where when everything drops out, it sounds like that riff. It reminded me of like a perfectly placed Paul's Boutique sample. I'm sure it's not a sample, but it feels very like, we're just going to throw in something weird, and it's awesome, and it totally works. Yeah, that bass line's killer. In fact, I would say it's probably 4 is the number of bands I've been in where somebody has wanted to play that song. And I've been like, I am game. I learned this bass line a long time ago. It's a test of strength. I'm ready. But then no one else wanted to do it.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, it's funny you mentioned samples because I do think this song is built on samples and loops. Obviously, the bass player has to play it live on stage, as you mentioned, but I believe it's a loop.
Oh.
And I don't know all the samples they're using. They were a little cagey about that, but I know that, for instance, there's that, it kind of sounds like a fast-moving train going by you on the platform.
That swell, that guitar swell kind of sounding thing. Yeah.
That's from a Who song called Armenia City in the Sky.
No way. Wow. All right. That's fun.
So the other thing I thought we'd find funny is the Octopad is a drum machine with playable pads on it, 8 of them. So the song name comes from a brief period where they were on the Lollapalooza tour, and they were on a small stage with not famous yet Moby, and they just walked onto the stage and saw some gaffer's tape indicating where Moby's drum machine was set up was supposed to be on the stage, and they like filed it away.
I'm genuinely surprised Moby hasn't like sued them over that or some shit. That is good.
That's pretty cool. Now, it's a cool tune. They did something odd in that first verse.
Sing off key?
That also is. Well, I've tried to. It's been 200 episodes since I've complained about that, so I've rinsed that from my brain.
I was thinking of you when I was listening to that because it is a little rough. I wish they had tightened up just specifically that first verse. I think the rest of it, like their approach to vocals, I see why some people might not like them. I like them. They don't need to be perfect, but I do think that one hurts my ear a little bit.
Well, I wonder if it got worse because I noticed that it starts off with a harmony and then halfway through the third line, the other harmony falls out. Usually harmonies build through a verse, and this one, it reduced. So I wonder if it was maybe after the fact, it was so sour. They were like, you know what? We're going to cut it. We're going to cut it here.
I think that's an example of all 3 of them singing. So we should have mentioned all 3 people in this band sing periodically. And not often at the same time. I don't think harmony is one of their strong suits exactly, but that is an example of all 3 of them singing at the same time.
Well, and speaking of giving the bass player a break, which sounds like it's probably not even the bass player playing, but there's a point where instead of having the bass drop out, they just lower it in the mix so that it's barely trying to creep through. I guess we can call it a criticism. It doesn't really bother me that much, but it seems weird that they would just shove it down into the mix instead of having a dropout.
They make some really weird mixing decisions, but I have to assume they're purposeful. Like there's a song we're going to talk about where the vocals are just like way behind everything else.
Yeah, gone.
Yeah.
So apparently Al Perkins, a guy who played with Elvis and was like on Exile on Main Street with the Rolling Stones, plays lap steel on this, but I cannot figure out where that would be.
There's slide or lap steel in another song, because I remember thinking there's no way Ira is playing this because it's a very complicated thing, but I don't think it was in this song.
No, he plays on 2 songs. I think you're thinking of the song Green Arrow that kind of has that Hawaiian chill with the crickets.
Yeah, right.
I love that song.
Yeah.
That's a cool song, yeah.
Also, this song has another Mets reference, by the way. There's a lyric, 8 o'clock, the lights are on at Shea Stadium. Old Mets Stadium.
Yeah, supposedly it's about them going to a Mets game and falling asleep. They're big Mets fans.
It's tough. My like for them is declining.
So I wanted to mention one other thing because I think nerds will point it out if I don't. It was pointed out to me that this bass line bears a strong resemblance to a slowed down version of another song that Adam absolutely hates called European Sun off the first Velvet Underground record. Now I listened. They have a point. But it's different enough that I don't think it's actual plagiarism.
Wait, so this is the slowed down version?
Man.
Yeah, European sounds like boom dum 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 boom boom dum 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 dum. Oh, but European Sun.
Dude, if you're copping Velvet Underground bass lines.
By the way, listening to that for the show this week, I was like, damn, I got to listen to more of this. This is even better than when we talked about it 5 years ago.
Okay, our paths are diverging, Rob.
Should we?
I like artsiness. Okay, let's move on to the next song we're going to talk about today. It is called Sugar Cube. This is the closest thing they're going to get to a single, dude. A pop single.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was the song where I started feeling like they could have written a bunch of 90s bangers if they wanted to. The year this came out, this actually felt more like a song that should have come out in like 92 or 93, maybe. But I could totally see this on like 120 Minutes on MTV. I could totally see a video for this where they're like skating in someone's empty pool in their backyard or something. This felt very... like legit pop singly.
But it's also power pop that's thrown back to the 70s. I mean, obviously it has a 90s element to it, but I think it's in that classic tradition of the big stars of the world or Teenage Fan Club or anyone in that lineage, right? And that's probably why they did make the music video for it.
I think this song probably kicks ass live. It left me wanting more because I think it does rock, but they're not super players. And it felt like there was a lack of a rhythm section because this is one of those songs where I didn't hear bass notes being hit in any kind of rhythm with the kick drum. It just sounded like there was just there might not have been bass. It could have just been all electric guitar that had a lot of low end on it. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
Well, they exhausted all their bass allotment in Moby Octopad, so there's just none left.
He had to go sit down. He needed a break for an hour.
I like how even though this is like so wall of noise, they still got a shaker take in there too.
Right, they'll do that, but they won't punch up the bass a little bit. I don't know.
It's an interesting decision. I wonder, it doesn't bump me at all. The song rocks for me. There might be an element, though, to your point, Adam, of wanting to be purposefully adversarial to the idea of making a pop song.
Sure.
I'm just guessing. I think, to me, this is a good example of their pop melody writing, but it's also, I think, a good example of what the kind of noisy guitar that really works for me. Like, to me, the noisy guitar feels very manicured, and they're able to make it really, really noisy and fuzzy, but still have it respond melodically to the vocal lines. Trying to be more uptight, da-da-na, trying to be more aware, ba-na-na. Like, it feels like it would be hard to wield that thing and get that kind of sound and still get those melodies across. I think he does a really good job with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what I liked about it. I think so often when you hear these really fuzzed out, feedbacky guitars, and I'm coming from a band that I played in with Phil for 5 or 6 years where there were 3 guitar players. So I'm not like anti-guitar on the whole, but what I hate is when you have the guy that takes 5 minutes and goes and stands by the amp and basically just like jacks off with his guitar. That's not this, though. They're using it in a way that it's like a seasoning, and it feels intentional and not just wankery, and I think it does work pretty well.
I really like the underwater outro. Just that little, it was a nice little touch. Sometimes those things can just feel like a pointless flourish, but that actually worked for me, just as it fades out.
And I think like already we're getting really 2 different kinds of bands. There is a lot of variety on this record. I know we've mentioned it, but they're willing to go down a lot of different paths. And the through line might be atmosphere, and maybe it's patience, but they sound like a pretty different band than on Moby Octopad. All right, let's move on to the next song. It's called Deeper Into Movies. I searched the record for a low point. There's no song I do not like. I actually like this song. This is the closest I could get. I had more complaints about this one. The vocals are bizarrely low in the mix. I do think they did it on purpose. I do think it's the atmosphere they're aiming for. So I'm not really suggesting that the song would be made better by turning them up, but it is a little distracting as I listen to the song.
They obviously did it on purpose because you can't listen to this and not notice it. In fact, I mean, Spotify said there were lyrics in the song, but you could barely hear them. So it was clearly an intentional choice. This, I would say, is probably a low point for me if I had to like hypothesize based on what you sent around. And I also, what I just said about the type of guitar noise that I hate is kind of what they do in this song. And it's not really additive for me. Yeah, I wasn't too into this one.
It's that wall of sound thing. It is a lot of guitars. And again, from a production and engineering standpoint, I can't find the individual instruments. It really does just come at you like a wall, and it just stays there at the same level. There's not a lot of dynamics. So I would support your choice as this is the low light.
Yeah, I feel conflicted about it is what I'm saying, because I truly don't. This song doesn't really bump me when I'm just playing through the record. I think they have a mode that this song fits into the category of slow build, noisy, with a lot of patience, and then some really simple melodies layered over on top. I just think this is one of the lesser of those songs in their catalog. And I will point to, for anyone who cares, one of my personal favorite Yo La Tengo songs is on the previous record. It is called Flying Lesson, subtitled Hot Chicken Number 1. It just feels like it's in the same category as this song, but I think much, much better.
I think where I kind of land on a song like this is listening to it continuously. It's not something that it stopped me in my tracks and I thought, oh, this is clearly a low point. But when you get into what does this clock in at, an hour and 10 minutes, something like that, it becomes very easy to see where you could trim the fat a little bit. And between this and there's a song that's not on our list, but there's a 10-minute song that comes later in the album that is, I think, worse than this, frankly. That's where it just sort of becomes like, I love that you're doing whatever you want, that you feel that confidence and the freedom. That's fantastic. But you could have pruned a little bit.
Hear, hear.
I agree. It goes on a bit. This track goes on a bit. The album goes on a bit. I can agree with that complaint intellectually. I will just tell you that listening to it, I don't really quite feel that way because so much of it is atmospheric and perhaps fades into the background and becomes a bit like furniture in, for me, a positive way. So just being honest that it's not really bumping me in this case, even though I have clearly complained about that type of thing in the past.
You're allowed to talk shit on it, Rob. I give you license. It's your pick.
It goes on a bit. No, it goes on a bit. I think if they were in a different position as a band and they were thinking about their legacy, or even if they were a different band and they were thinking, this is our chance, this is our major label shot, this is the moment that everyone's going to be watching us, I think they would have trimmed it down. But I kind of think the fact that they didn't says something about who they are as a band. They do not care if you like them or not. That's just a strong impression I get from them. And I think that has, conversely, what has drawn people to them.
Yeah, very true. A major record label would have definitely pushed those buttons. And so, yeah, I agree with that.
Let's move on to the next song we're going to talk about, which is called Stockholm Syndrome.
Your heart is broken and the doors are open as you're hoping to be. There's brighter places to see. Hands need warming early in the morning, hardly as long as surprise. No, don't warn me, I know it's wrong, but I swear it won't take long. And I know you know it makes me sigh.
This is the mode that I like them in. It sounds nice. His voice is in the mix. It's produced well. You can hear the instruments. I think this is just the lane that I like them in. I really like this song a lot.
Yeah, the song's great. It's awesome pop song. This also, what Rob, you mentioned that slew of bands earlier that I don't know that they were influenced by this, but they sort of lived in that same circle, Spoon and Death Cab and all those other bands that you mentioned, if that was even one of them. This song used to anchor so many of my Spotify playlists back in the day, or excuse me, my Pandora playlist actually. And not because I said it, but no matter what I put in, it was like all roads lead to this song. It seemed like, so I got hammered with this in the best possible way back in like the, mid 2000s. But it's a good song.
It's a great tune. It feels classic. I heard people say that he sounds like Neil Young here. This is the bass player singing, by the way.
Oh, he does. Oh, okay, yeah.
I think of it as closer to something like a Kinks song. They're huge Kinks fans, so I could see this as a Kinks song. But also the touchstone you just mentioned, Allan. I didn't mention Death Cab earlier, but that's a great touchstone. I would find it hard to believe that Death Cab were not influenced at least a little bit by something like this.
That's interesting that I didn't realize it was the bass player singing, and then maybe I gave too much credit in the versatility of the vocalist. Although I still think he hits different things on the album, but I think it was it felt like a change of pace vocally, so it landed.
Totally. It is his first lead vocal for the band.
Oh, wow.
But I agree with you guys. I think it's absolutely one of my favorite songs on the record. It's one of the ones that originally struck me. It's not one of the singles or, I wasn't even aware of the singles, but when I was listening to the record for the first time, it's one of the ones that jumped out to me, and it's the one I find myself humming the most often. So very catchy, very successful. I like that they still got a noise solo in there, by the way. Again, a noise solo is wrong. It's fuzzy and buzzy, but it's extremely melodic.
I had in my head that they brought in Billy Corgan and played a different song and had him solo of that, and then just took the guitar track and dumped it on this one. I was like, whatever happens, happens.
You don't just bring in Billy Corgan. You have to
yeah, you're right.
call it a Billy Corgan album, and you probably have to put his name on there.
You need a trail of breadcrumbs to get him into the studio. All right, let's go on here to the next and last song on our focus list. It is called Autumn Sweater. We played it at the top. We're going to play another clip now.
Oh, wouldn't that be better? Me with nothing to say, and you in your autumn sweater.
So I mentioned that sometimes guest James may be a mixed CD in college. This is my first time hearing Yola Tengo. Specifically, though, of all the songs he put on there, this really jumped out of the speakers at me. We can begin to dissect why I think of this as a signature song for them. It is their most played song on Spotify.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought that.
It's pretty humble and subtle as a song, I must say. Now knowing more about their catalog, about their story, I think it encompasses a lot of what they do and how willingly they're able to genre hop. Like it is, I was thinking this week about how it's got a real clubby aspect to it. And it was reminding me a little bit of Primal Scream, which we covered recently, which was a rock band melded with club hits to a certain extent. To me, it's an excellent track that sets a perfect vibe. It's perfect nerd fodder for a song. I'm nervous being at this party. I'm nervous going on a date. Let's get out of here. Let's be awkward together. And that, frankly, just resonated with 19 or 20-year-old me.
Right.
It's funny. I did not know that this was their most streamed song. I wouldn't even thought it was that close in the top tier. But also what you said, Rob, though, I agreed with, which is this encapsulates the band. And this is one of the songs where if someone were to say, like, what does Yola Tango sound like? This is one of the songs that would come to mind, even if I couldn't really explain why. In my head, it would land there. And the drum beat, this is one of the two songs from this album they played live when I saw them, and it killed. The drum beat is super cool, but also the restraint they have, they wait about a minute and a half to bring the bass in. And when they bring the bass in, it's super fuzzy. And I know I've been talking shit about like fuzz string instruments all night here, but the way they deploy it after making you wait for a while, it's just perfect, and it's like minimalist that all comes together in a really cool way, I think.
I also think it's lyrically strong, and I think that Ira's vocal fits well here. To me, Ira is maybe the weakest vocalist. It's arguable, but I think he's probably the weakest vocalist of the three, but this feels like a great fit for him.
Obviously, the folks listening can't see, but there was a pause there for a second, and Rob looked over like, Adam, what do you have to say? And I'm just kind of like, oh, whatever. I know. I mean, I guess I understand why this is popular. It just felt a little one note to me. It just, that keyboard just kind of droned on a bit too long.
Listen, audience, it is not at all surprising to me that Adam does not like this material. There's nothing that surprises me in that. I thought maybe, Adam, you would like some of the pop melody coming through this. The litany of records where I have thought, Adam, you will maybe like this, and you either have or have not. This is one I kind of wasn't expecting you to particularly like. But with that out of the way, with our songs out of the way, now is the time when we vote. Does this belong back on the 1001 list? I'm obviously a yes, so I will leave it in your hands. Should it be added back, gentlemen? And I'm going to throw it first to Allan.
All right. Well, I thought you'd throw it to Adam first to build a little bit of intrigue here. We might have a split decision, but I think it's a yes. In fact, when you sent this around for the glaring omissions, I was surprised that it wasn't already on there, and definitely surprised that the band wasn't on there. I know they are indie rock, and so you could make a case that, well, not everyone knows them, but I feel like they've attained that status where, yes, they are underground, but they're probably the most well-known underground band in that sense. I think this is definitely a yes. They need something on this list. This is their best record, or at least their most heralded. It's a fairly easy yes for me. And Dimery, you could have this on there. What are you doing?
All right, let's throw it next to Adam.
Rob, fantastic story. Well done on the background. Focus list was great. Maybe I would have appreciated these guys more if I discovered them with you all in high school or in college, or if I had some traumatic brain injury. But Rob, you said they have very cool fans and cool people know who they are. Well, I don't know them, which means they and you are low-key insulting me. So it
was high-key.
All right. Oh, okay. High-key insulting me. I'm actually going to say no. I don't think this reaches that level, but it doesn't matter because we've got two yeses. So they're cruising through, Rob.
Yeah, they got a little bit of an easy pass tonight. I think Tom was originally supposed to come in, although I'm pretty confident he would have landed on yes as well, knowing him as well as I do.
I will brace myself for the ire that will come on the Patreon page.
It's okay. Listen, I don't think this band is necessarily for everyone, but I do think they represent an important strand of the musical story, of a band that just keeps going, doing what they want to do, trying a lot of different things, experimenting, bringing the heart of artsy experimentation and melding it with pop sensibility. That is ultimately a lane that I very, very much like. I don't like pure experimentalism for experimentalism's sake, nor noise, but when you're able to marry it with pop songwriting and melody, I tend to like it a lot. So happy to have Yo La Tengo back on our list, the only list that matters to me. It shall be done, and we are going to get to some more glaring omissions before you know it. But as we round out today's episode, let's take a moment to dip our hands in the old mailbag. All right, listener John writes, I've just discovered your podcast, and I started to listen to past episodes about my favorite records. I started with Robbie Williams' Life Through a Lens.
Oh, wow.
Not a great place to start.
Okay. All right.
I'm not a massive fan, but I've enjoyed his stuff, and he's brilliant live. The only thing you guys said that drew me up short is not understanding why the song Angels is so popular. It's clear as day from a European perspective. It's a brilliant song to sing communally, from weddings to sporting events to Oktoberfest. If Angels comes on, everybody, and I mean everybody, is belting it out at the top of their lungs.
That explains it. That totally explains it.
I'll belt anything out if you give me enough beers.
It's funny that the listener wrote this in because that was a long time ago we did that episode, but I happened to recently be watching a British television show, and there was a bar scene and people were singing something, and I was like, oh, that sounds vaguely familiar. And it was Robbie Williams' Angels. Fair enough. We don't always understand what's going on over there. Next up, we have listener Walker writing in, hey, I can't be the only person who mentioned this. You weren't, Walker, but thank you. I'm reading your email. You're lucky. He says, The Wall didn't sell 11 million records in a single year. What happened was the RIAA changed how they handled multiple disc albums one year. So double albums effectively doubled certification-wise all at once.
Oh, they counted each album individually, not the whole package. Oh, man. Okay.
Correct. And then at some point they changed that, and so there was a correction that was a little confusing. Tom of late has liked to consult some kind of RIAA certification timeline and always bring that stuff up. Doesn't seem overly relevant to me anyway. Point of this email is that Tom was wrong.
That must have happened after Guns N' Roses did the juking the stats of the two User Illusions instead of doing the double album. Didn't they release it
I'm actually surprised more bands don't do that. That feels like the way to make more money.
It also feels like the biggest dick move. Which is why Guns N' Roses were all about it.
Anyway, Walker closes by saying, I love the pod, and 2 years ago I went on a solo week-long road trip during which I probably crushed 3 to 4 episodes per day.
Damn.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Damn. And live to tell about it.
Yeah.
Thank you for writing in. Tell us where we're wrong. Tell us what we don't understand. Tell us what we missed. Tell us what we got right, too. We love hearing all of it. Send it over to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. And we have but one thing left to wrap up tonight's show. It is to pull the Albinator out of the old corner where it resides in its Harry Potter closet and see what we shall be listening to next week. So let's give it a spin. Without further ado, we shall be listening to George Michael's Faith.
Okay. He covers that Limp Bizkit song, doesn't he?
Exactly. Yes, that's what we can all look forward to. More Fred Durst, or as Phil likes to call him, Fred Dirt references.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Nice.
Looking forward to that. A little light pop music, I assume. Maybe a little more up Adam's alley. Probably the vocals are good.
Yeah, right. They're probably on key. That dude can sing.
We hope you listen along with us to George Michael's Faith and join us again next week. For everyone here at 1001 Album Complaints, I have been Rob.
I'm Allan.
And I'm Adam.